But how we would determine this is we just go about measure it from the data, and everything that's correlated to the market we call systematic, and everything that's uncorrelated in the data we call unsystematic. And as you've seen, it's not crystal clear where the risks that will actually end up with, but we don't really have to worry about it since we just measure it from the data. Okay, so this is basically what we call a regression equation, right? That's something that we can measure in the data. We determine the coefficients alpha and beta. Typically, the assumptions to determine these regressions are that the average epsilon is 0, right? Because if there is a positive average, it will appear in the constant. It will be kind of sucked up by that constant. So, and another assumption is that we need is that the epsilons here are uncorrelated to the market. And these epsilons are also sometimes called residuals in empirical work. So, I want to use this equation to get like a relationship between the different risk measures. So what we're going to do is we compute now the variance of the market return. So I write down this derivation here below. The result is already on the slide. So let's compute the variance of our stock. All right. So that's basically just the variance of this long formula that I've given you as an empirical model. So that's the variance of alpha k plus beta times the market return plus the idiosyncratic return. Now we can split up these terms individually. So what's the variance of alpha?
0?
Yeah, exactly. So let's write this down thoroughly here. So that's the variance of alpha k. And you've correctly said this is 0. Zoom out again. And the second term will be beta k squared times the variance of the market. And the last term will be the variance of the epsilons. So this part disappears at 0. Then we have beta times the market variance. So this is now what we call systematic risk. Right? These are systematic returns, and the risk of the systematic returns, that's the systematic risk. And this here is now called idiosyncratic risk. So that's a positive risk that you have. However, it's separate from the beta. Right? So the systematic risk is not incorporated in the beta. So the thing that I need to explain you next is why only the systematic risk is priced and why there is no market price for these idiosyncratic risks, because they didn't appear in our capital asset pricing model formula. So if you rewrite this here in this form, you actually find a relationship between the total volatility or variance and the beta, right? So the volatility can be split up in two components, in the systematic and unsystematic component. And only the systematic component, which depends on beta, is relevant for pricing. And the second one, the idiosyncratic one, is not relevant for pricing. So it is a risk, right? Call it risk, but it's an unpriced risk. Part here, that's my total variance here. So the total variance or volatility was what we put on the x-axis in the portfolio theory, right? And the beta was what we have on the x-axis in the capital asset pricing. And then we have the systematic risk. And here it's important that this is priced in the sense that there is a risk premium for that. And only for that we have the idiosyncratic risk. And this seems to be unpriced because it's not part of our capital asset pricing model formula. So far, so good. Any questions here? Okay, so let me kind of do this with an example. And this red line that we see here is the volatility of a portfolio. And on the x-axis, I have shown how many stocks are in the portfolio. So I assume that the stocks are all behaving in a similar fashion like here. All right, so we have a beta. I actually hold the beta of the portfolio constant. So my portfolio beta here in this example is 1.1. My market variance and volatility is 20%, and every single stock has an idiosyncratic volatility of 33%. Right? So every single stock is having these idiosyncratic factors, the unsystematic risk. So the portfolio volatility is on the y-axis, the number of stocks in the portfolio is on the x-axis. And what do you see? Well, you see that the portfolio variance is going down and down and down the more assets you put in, and if you have 100 assets in there, it will kind of end up at a certain level. This level is here highlighted using the dashed line. And we can actually nail down what this should be. So this will be beta squared, right? 1.1 times the market, 20%. Don't have to put on the beta times the market variance, basically. So this limit here is exactly 22%. So that's the dashed line. So what's the volatility for this here? It'll be slightly different. So this will be 1.1 times 20% for the systematic risk, but plus the unsystematic risk of the portfolio, and then take the square root out of this. So what you can see from this is that the more assets you add, this component here disappears. Actually, mathematically show this for the limit for this going to infinity, then this formula remains. This effect has a name that I've coined already sometimes before. It's called diversification. So the general idea is that these unsystematic components, which are individual to single companies, you can get rid of them by forming a diversified portfolio. Right? So these operational risks, which are very special to one specific company, it's basically tiny if you have 100 different companies in your portfolio. Right? And just by mere chance, if one company does badly, we'll have another one that does well. Right? So at the end of the day, you don't have to consider the unsystematic risks in a well-diversified portfolio. Now, the tendency portfolio and the market portfolio are the most diversified portfolios that we have. Right? So for the tendency portfolio and the market portfolio, it should hold that the idiosyncratic risk is exactly zero. It should be away. And because investors can easily obtain diversified portfolios, why should you pay a price for that? Right? So you would only be willing to pay or want to have a risk premium for idiosyncratic risk if you're not able to form a diversified portfolio, because then you're carrying the risk. And indeed, there's some investors in the world who have that. Like, look at Elon Musk. He's basically very much depending now on two companies, Tesla and Twitter, right? So he cannot diversify that idiosyncratic risk of that company. Well, the biggest risk factor is probably himself, right? That he effed it up. So, and that's something he cannot diversify, I'm afraid. Right? So he'll be stuck with that problem for the rest of his life, I guess. So maybe we could add You're not like on that with Jeff Bezos with
Chả
his
biết,
with
không nghe đâu.
space exploration, right?
At least one of the continents wouldn't be traded anymore. So
Yeah.
maybe that
But still, the risk of the company is still attributed to him, right? So even if it's not traded anymore, it's just not visible anymore that he adds it up, right? So, so there are large investors who own large shares of corporations, entrepreneurs who have a big share of idiosyncratic risk. And the big problem is they cannot diversify that, right? So actually, for everyone who's getting kind of paid big bonus, even like you maybe later on, you might get some shares of the companies you work for. That's for you actually a big idiosyncratic risk, because first of all, your salary already depends on the well-being of the company, your bonus, and then you will get shares on top of that, so you're even more exposed to the risk of that specific company.